Hello, thank you very much for inviting me. My name's Nicholas Bonner. I'm the director of Korea and Studio. We're a company based in Beijing, and we've been specialising in travel, film and cultural exchange with North Korea since 1993. Could you briefly introduce how you got involved with tourism in the DPRK and the production of films? I'd trained as a landscape architect in Leeds in Britain, and was a tutor, went over to Asia because there was a big interest in Asian design, particularly at that time, and went to North Korea with a chum, found it fascinating and thought, well, let's find out a little bit more. I subsequently moved over to Beijing, and we set up a travel company because that was the best way to get access in and out of the country and for us to get paid to go in and out, and it just developed from there. The films started slowly, perhaps the first one was a travel documentary in 1996, and then we made the three films with Daniel Gordon, which was on the football team, The Game of Their Lives, The Mass Games, The State of Mind, and The American Defectors, Crossing the Line. And I've made other films since then. Aim High in Creation, which was a film on trying to understand North Korean propaganda. And I made a romantic comedy, Comrade Kim Goes Flying. That was North Korea's first ever, I suppose you'd call it a girl power film, and classified as their first film ever for entertainment. And recently Michael Palin, who's a sort of a travel writer and presenter, and we took him into North Korea a couple of years ago. Could you tell us about how you came to be involved with The State of Mind, and what your purpose or goal of producing the film was? After making The Game of Their Lives, Dan and I promised ourselves we'd never make another film in North Korea again. It was exhausting, it was very rewarding, but very, very tiring, very hard work. But we said to ourselves in edit, if there was a film we'd have to make, it would have to be The Mass Games. I'd taken Dan to see it on one of his trips before we started filming for The Game of Their Lives. It is an incredible performance, 100,000 people. No one really knew how it worked, apart from obviously the North Koreans who organised it. So we wanted to get in there. We wanted to be, initially, just observe it, just actually film the event. But then, with incredible access, we became sort of almost like a fly on the wall for these two girls. We managed to film them and, remarkably, their families in the lead up to a performance. It was an indoor performance, and it was absolutely remarkable. What was the purpose of the goal of it? I mean, that's answered it, I think. You can see in my expression. I mean, it was just extraordinary. We still keep in contact with, in fact, all of our protagonists. A lot of the lads from the 1966 team have sadly died, but the girls, Hyun-sun and Soyoung, we still sort of know about their whereabouts. Saw them actually sort of 4 years ago, but still keep in contact via different methods. So that's very good. It's still perhaps one of the, in my life, one of the biggest achievements, certainly. How was money raised for A State of Mind? Well, it all goes back, I think, to the first film that Daniel and I made on the football team of 1966. We got permission to try and find out the players who created the greatest shock in World Cup history. They beat the Italians 1-0 in the 1966 World Cup. And we had permission, but we didn't have the money. And the company that was going to sponsor us, it was a sports company, just thought it wasn't going to happen and pulled the funding. And if there's one thing you don't do with North Korea, it's promise one thing and then not deliver. So that was a bit of a disaster, but we subsequently basically raised the money ourselves. We raised around 100,000 to get in and into the country, film the football players and come out. And because of that, we had some great footage, managed to track down an Oscar producer, John Batsek, who basically introduced us to the BBC, who paid for the post-production. And from then on, we were sort of on the BBC books, and they financed A State of Mind. Could you perhaps talk about the negotiation process with the Korean authorities? There's not really a lot to talk about. I mean, you end up there's a price per day, a shooting fee. That's standard for most filming companies that go there. and you sign your contract for as many days you shoot, and then when you're there, if you're using archive footage, there's also a fee for that. So that's fairly straightforward. Any interesting episodes? Filming in North Korea is always interesting and always very difficult, very tiring. It requires an enormous amount of trust from the people you work with, and having made one film beforehand, The Game of Their Lives, which was probably the first sort of real involvement with the film crew where we were asking questions and getting really involved. So it was the first time the North Koreans really had made a production with a Western film crew. Moving on to do A State of Mind, it certainly became a very, very interesting and challenging process. The film took a lot longer than we thought. Instead of just 2 shoots, it was several shoots, simply because there was the SARS virus that came out, and that restricted us from coming in and out. In fact, I think Dan had to cancel his wedding 2 times to his wife Lou because of this. Because also they, not only the SARS, but also they moved the date for the final production of the mass games. But yeah, it's always an interesting and very tough process. Perhaps it's also not only trust from both sides. I mean, and that was particularly shown by the way we got access to the kids. They started showing us, first of all, Hyun-sun, who was the best dancer, without doubt, the best gymnast. And when we wanted, the second time the shoot, we wanted access to her family, they tried to put us off, and they sort of invited us to film Song-yeon. And Song-yeon was, from a much better family, physics teacher as a father. And we said no, and they said, well, you have to. We've now, the grandfather of Hyun-sun is ill, and therefore you should not film them. And he said, it's a documentary, this is what we film. In the end, we got, in fact, the best of both worlds. We said to them, we'll compromise, we'll film both, which actually for us was ideal. And the Koreans agreed. It was because they didn't want their country betrayed. Hyun-sun's family is a bit rough and ready. They wanted us to film the better family. And in fact, in the end, we filmed both. And because of that, we then also got access to the family in the countryside. So it was all pretty remarkable. One lovely sort of anecdote I remember is when we were filming The Game of Their Lives, we were trying to get shots of the city, and we went on one of the buses, one of the trolley buses, and they started clearing out all the old people, and John and I just said, well, we're not going to film unless you're going to give us, free rein here to film who and what we want. And they said, no, you're filming, just to make us look poor and sad. So we just got off the bus and said, well, that's that. But the sound man stood up and said, aren't you proud of your old people who fought for you in the Korean War? And then they sort of stopped. And from then on, old people were ushered onto the bus whenever there was. So we got access. And sometimes you just have to think, how they see things, how we see things are different. And there's always somewhere that you can come in between and work it out. And we did. And that, I think, has been the trick, if it's called a trick, or that has been the method we've employed. Basically trust, listening, and a lot of patience. Were there a lot of requests for editing or deleting from your counterparts? No, it's interesting. This is, again, we refuse to show any of our films to the North Korean authorities. When we've made them, they go straight out on air. But having been in Korea, North Korea for so long, I'm aware of the sort of limitations and where we can go. But we've never actually had to cross the line. It was a great one on returning when we showed them this film, and we took it back, and it's always a bit worrying. You wonder if you should have bought a return ticket or just stay with a single ticket. But I arrived in Pyongyang and showed them the film, and the first question was, the first thought came out, this film is very dark, and I thought, oh goodness me, that's a bit tricky. We're going to be in trouble here. But they meant dark as in, there's a lot of rain and dark days. And then the best one was, they said, this film is not as good as your first film, The Game of Their Lives. It's very boring. It's very much like real life, which for us was a fantastic tick. Is there anything you would tell a South Korean audience to bear in mind before watching the film? No, this film I've shown it to North Korean friends who would give me a very honest opinion, and they've said, look, this is just like real life. There's perhaps when they're on film in the home, there's more formal speaking, you'll pick that up straight away. But it's pretty much, you know, the kids sort of being filmed day in, day out. I mean, there's a lovely one of So-young who sort of, when we sort of filming her, and she says, enough, and she puts the bed clothes over her. You know, we were sort of filming continually. I think we had over 120 hours footage, so that's a lot for a documentary. No, I think go in with an open mind, and you know, some people love it, some people hate it, some people see kids being abused, some people see kids, you know, having fun, you know, in sort of challenge and taking pride in it. I think that's the wonderful thing. We try and be as objective as you can. Therefore, we would like our audience to be as objective as they can. Can you tell us your opinion about one Western perception that sees the mass games as an infringement on human rights? If that's how you want to see it, then I'm not in a position to tell you otherwise. My personal opinion is it's very, very tough. There's no doubt about that. It takes an enormous amount of man hours or children hours practice on very hard surfaces, and that cannot be brilliant for the body. But having seen the kids, you know, there's a great pride that they take in having been in the mass games, and I speak to North Koreans who weren't selected for the mass games, and for them that was sort of a bit of an embarrassment. I've also had a niece who, you know, practiced like this. She's a gymnast, and she didn't make, you know, the Olympics. A friend just has in the last Olympics, won bronze. And if you want to get good, you know, you have to practice. And that's tough. So I'm, you know, everything with North Korea, I mean, people have opinions this side and this side, and they're all legitimate. If you were to compare the Pyongyang of 2006, when the film was made, and Pyongyang of today, what changes in lifestyle have you observed? It would be, I always say, if you had a map of Pyongyang, even one in 1993, and you sort of went around the city, apart from 3 new streets, it's basically the same city as it was then. There are changes in the early 2000s with the sort of impact of I think the Sunshine Policy. That had a great change. That changed people's views as viewing South Koreans as the enemy to seeing just a country divided. That really was a strong impact. Then there was economic change, and that allowed people to sort of suddenly to change focus from survival into sort of looking at small luxuries, etc. And that was a great time. So the mind was opened, if you like. Things were coming in from, particularly from China, also from the West. We were involved with the Pyongyang International Film Festival. That was buzzing away. There was new information coming into the country. That sadly has closed both due to the virus and sanctions. I think, you know, I'm a great one for a carrot and a stick policy. I think there should be engagement. I think engagement works. Whether it just works on one person or that one person is instrument to change, I don't know, but I do believe in that. And at the moment, things are very, very closed in. Korea Tours has a relatively long history in tourism in the country. Can you tell us about our future plans? Well, for tourism, I mean, that just relies on the country reopening, and we've got a long time to wait for that. First of all, China will open, and then when China's open, we will be allowed to take tourists into that country, and then from there hopefully into North Korea. Tourism, I believe, of great benefit, both directly to Korean people we work with, and opening up the country, just simple access-wise, and showing people, foreigners, I think is a good thing. Of course, there is the reverse of that, people saying, oh, you're propping up the regime. Well, with the number of tourists, I think 4,000 tourists go a year. It's not reached that stage by a long chalk. So we will wait and see. We alongside tourism, of course, that allows us to to do our cultural projects, which we strongly believe in, whether that be humanitarian aid or whether that sort of be filmmaking, etc. And we believe, particularly through filmmaking and art and sports exchanges, that we make a rather large contribution to that side of things, to both showing us in the outside world what North Korea is about, but also showing North Koreans what is going on in the outside world. And about the plans for Choreo Studio. Choreo Studio, yeah, we've got great plans for that. I've managed to collect a considerable bit of art from the 1950s, actually personal sketch of artists of that period, right through the whole gamut of propaganda to ink works, etc., and a graphic collection. We're wanting to put that on permanent display, and we're looking at a place for that. Actually, probably will be in Italy. It can't be in South Korea because that would upset the North Korean authorities. I'm upset with Brexit, so it's not going to be in England, and the States, no. So we've gone for Italy. So that's going to be a massive thing. That should be happening next year. But at the same time, we're working with North Korean artists and photographers. We've just finished a project photographing North Korean film stars, and that's been done actually as the virus is going on and as North Korea is locked down. We've had a photographer, friend of ours, take photographs of a North Korean photographer, take photographs of film stars. We're getting those back. We've got a few of them now, and we're going to create a calendar for that, an art house sort of calendar, because North Korea produces a film calendar every year, but for the last 2 years, because of the coronavirus, it hasn't. And we're always sort of pushing artists to sort of outside the realms of what their studios sort of prescribe for them. So we're trying to sort of widen what they can do. They're not allowed to do abstract art, but we at least give them something that makes them perhaps think a little bit out of the box. So we continue to build up our art collection with them, and we've set up Choreo Studio on the website for selling that. Can you talk about your personal method or any operating principles when working with North Korean counterparts? I mentioned that briefly, that in the end it's trust. That's all that you can rely on. Of course, anything you do with North Korea, there's going to be money involved. For them, you represent, sort of both information from the outside world, but also a revenue stream. So we're very careful that the money we do get to the North Koreans, now because of sanctions, we're very, very careful, of course, to obey those rules. But what we want is that any project where you do have to invest, such as Pyongyang Marathon, that money is used to sort of broaden people's horizons as well as get the job done. For the Koreans, they want the job done. They need to earn revenue both for themselves and both to send up into their system. But for us, of course, we're wanting the maximum from that, and that is engagement and also, of course, revenue to keep our company going. So it's trust, I would say, in the end, and developing relations, making sure you don't offend them, which is very easy to do. So you really got to know. I think the advantage of being a Westerner and with almost no Korean is that you're forgiven a certain amount, but it's one of these countries where the longer you work there, the less you are forgiven because you should have known better. So it gets, in fact, instead of getting easier, it gets more and more difficult. But we've got a great team. I mean, before the virus, there were 15 of us. We're now down to 5 or 6 of us, and we're not in the country, so it's difficult. We would like support from other people who believe in the work we're doing. We've just done a project, Koryo Archive, and we've had sponsorship for that. It's projects like that where we really do sometimes feel isolated, where we would like support. Not only we get a lot of support, funnily enough, from our North Korean friends. For example, filming, it's incredible the actual way they will push for us. For example, in A State of Mind, there was just no way we were going to get access to that family until our North Korean producer said, yes, I understand what you want to do, I will help you. But as much as we get support from North Koreans, we don't get support from companies outside and charities outside who sort of might sort of believe in our work. Touching North Korea for a lot of people is just don't go there. It's a poison chalice. I understand that, but if you believe in engagement as much as we do, then we need support. Thank you.